you mentioned Julian Assange. Julian Assange is a really good example of what happens. One of the reasons we don't have, I think, anti-war voices, it's not the only reason, but it is a big one, is that people like Julian Assange himself, they are punished. They are repressed, right? We talk about authoritarianism. I mean, look at what is going on. Look what is happening to Julian Assange. But even people like Jeffrey Sachs, Dr. Jeffrey Sachs, he is an economist. He is someone who has been very vocal against what's happening in Ukraine. He's also been someone who has been very fair on China, right? And talking and opposing this new Cold War on China. I want to play just a short clip from a Twitter thread. I'm not going to play all the clips, but there's one that I think shows,
I know which one.
Yeah, that you can only say certain things. This is at the Athens Democracy Forum, which is sponsored by the New York Times. It's a big foundation. I want to scroll down to the clip that's going viral right now, where Jeffrey Sachs basically just is telling the truth, but he is. Before I begin, but he is shut down pretty quickly. Here's what he had to say, and I want your reaction, Richard.
The ledger. And one more point I want to make about democracy, because we're in a democracy forum where we treat democracy as the good. The most violent country in the world in the 19th century, by far, was perhaps the most democratic or second most democratic, and that was Britain. You can be democratic at home and ruthlessly imperial abroad. The most violent country in the world since 1950 has been the United States. It's been by far involved
Jeffrey,
in more,
stop
wait,
now.
in more
Let's Jeffrey, I'm Jeffrey, I'm your moderator, and it's enough.
Okay, I'm done.
Oh. Jeffrey, go to your room immediately.
Jeffrey. I mean, could it be any more? And he had spoken for a few minutes before that, but it was only like, I think, a total of 5 minutes. I don't want to play the whole thing because the whole copyright thing, but on YouTube. But it was 5 minutes. Not
like a child.
Yes, but Jeffrey, like I mean, this is Jeffrey Sachs has done a lot in his career as an economist. He's consulted for a whole many different politicians and various very influential political figures all across the world. And this is how he's treated when he says what he said. Anyway, your reaction.
Well, like, man, they treated him like a child. They had to shut him up because, you know, this is the infamous free speech of the West. You start speaking the truth and they'll shut you down, right? So that was I get what he was saying. I mean, I don't really view the UK as democratic because we have like I said, an unelected king. I have no clue who this guy is. He's my king, apparently. We have a prime minister. I also have no clue who he is, unelected by his party and the British people. So unelected kings, unelected prime ministers, and we have journalists in high security prisons. So yeah, very democratic, you know. I understand his point though, because some people want to believe that the US is democratic, or that the UK is democratic. And if you want to believe that, okay, but it's not true. And you know, his point is very valid. You know, you can be a democracy at home or pretend to be a democracy at home and still screw people overseas and kill them and make their lives hell and subjugate them. And that is what the UK did in India. And what you had basically 25% of both the world's landmass and world population under British rule at the height of the British Empire. That's not even 150 years ago. Not even. So, you know, the US has now basically taken over. I think you could say since the Suez Canal crisis, you know, the French and British were kind of shown to be like these irrelevant powers, and it was the US which is now in control. You know, for various factors, of course, you know, having all these military bases, you know, Africa, I think 51 out of 54 African countries have either US military bases or military attaches, which basically you can just call a US military presence. So they have AFRICOM, which is dominating that continent, the entire continent, and they have the biggest drone base. I think it's, where was it again? Is it in Niger? I don't remember which country it's in. It might be in Niger, but it's ridiculously big and secret. And I bet you most people in America don't even know it exists. and it costs, like tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars to build. And they use Djibouti, for medevac, if I'm not mistaken. They also have other bases there, and the whole Horn of Africa. Why are they letting the Saudis screw Yemen, and why are they in Somalia and Djibouti? Because this is the most important shipping lane on earth. All of the oil comes through here. All of the trade comes through here. They want to control the Gulf of Aden, the Gulf of Oman, and the vital economic routes. And one of the ways they do this, of course, is with their military bases. And oftentimes they do this by force, and other times they'll bribe officials there, or leverage something against them in order to get the base there. And that's very undemocratic. It's very authoritarian and aggressive. And I don't think most people understand that or want to understand that, but they should. They have to understand what European powers have done overseas, and what the United States is doing now overseas. A lot of these countries are now so-called democracies. Belgium, the Netherlands, the UK, France, Portugal, Spain, the US, but their behavior overseas is not. Like, believe they're democratic all you want, but their behavior overseas was genocide, was plundering, and it still continued. I don't agree that decolonization, maybe it started in 1945, but it certainly didn't end. They talk about it like it finished or something once India became independent. And no, that's not true. If you go to Niger, that was under French colonization, and it still is, because they have 70% of electricity in France, is powered by nuclear. Okay, so 70% of France's electricity comes from nuclear, and they get the uranium for that from Niger. People in Niger don't have any infrastructure. They don't have. They're not reaping any benefits from this deal with the French. So now, instead of the French government doing it or the French army, you have a French multinational, which now has been nationalized anyway, in Niger, still exerting influence from l'Élysée, from Paris onto Niger, still plundering that country, and this disgusting imbalance. It's not like it's a fair deal. No, it's exploitation. So and Charles de Gaulle, the French president, he was adamant about this, about maintaining French influence in Africa. And to this day, you have so many countries that have a French currency that's minted in France, the CFA franc. It's 14 African countries. So you can say France is democratic, liberté, égalité, fraternité, but it's rubbish. They don't even apply it at home, never mind overseas. So this is an important myth to dispel, and I'm glad Jeffrey Sachs said it, because you still have people who might not believe that their countries are they think their countries are infallible. Well, I hate to break it to you, but they aren't, and they commit a lot of atrocities, and they still are. We're in a neo-colonial period. It's still ongoing, and it's the same actors doing it to the same countries in your name. So if you care about democracy like you claim, then actually apply that and look at the behavior and examine it, and don't swallow the propaganda that they spread in Western press and Western institutions and colleges. There's a whole system designed to make people ignorant about what their governments are doing overseas, and that has to be broken. It has to be broken.
Yeah. I mean, agreed with your point about what Jeffrey Sachs said. I mean, yeah, I would with the caveat, just very similar to what you're saying, is that you could say that Britain and then now the United States, you could, if you want to call them democracies, I'd like to think of more of how Lenin would describe the democracies here. It's democracies for the rich, right? It is it's their dictatorship, but it's very democratic for them because they make the decisions. They have the power. They are able to do things like the transatlantic slave trade, colonization, and also exploit people at home, be able to enrich themselves, exploit workers, exploit ordinary people within their own borders.
Just like Israel's democratic, but as long as you're a Jewish settler,
Yeah, exactly, right. An apartheid, a so-called apartheid democracy, you could call it. And I think it's important to point out those contradictions. But Jeffrey Sachs, you could tell what he was doing. He was trying to get this message out in a way that the Athens Democracy Forum could handle that message. And even then, the moderator had to say, oh, no. Didn't you see the New York Times label up there? We do not say these things in the New York Times. So that means you can't say it either.
Yeah. So much for free speech, right? Like they always say that it's China and Iran and Syria and all these like evil quote unquote countries that are undemocratic and authoritarian and don't allow dissent. But it's really in the West. And I that video you played is one iteration of that. And I've seen firsthand in the courtroom, a British judge like basically rubber stamping. He even said it in so many words. It's like, there's nothing I can really do now. I'm just sending this to the Home Secretary. Do you understand that you are now going to be extradited to the U.S.? And that's the journalist being threatened with 175 years, and 17 of the 18 counts are for espionage. So talk about authoritarian. That's like a textbook case of locking up dissenters. You just call them spies. And I don't know anyone in China or Iran or Syria who's been given 175 years or threatened with that, or like dragged from another continent, to be put in jail for dissenting. You know what's funny? I'll tell you something, man. Assange, if I'm not mistaken, it was WikiLeaks, right? So Assange's so his company, not company, but publishing house that he created, right? So WikiLeaks published the emails of Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian president. And, it's funny because there's nothing really in there. I think there's some stuff about them buying chandeliers or something, but like, not, you compare that to the American ones with like drone striking children. I mean, so much for the evil narrative. But, the Syrian government didn't start saying, okay, we want to extradite this guy and put him in jail because he published our emails. On the contrary, they actually support him.